Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today as co-host is Chris Rossini. He's not in New Jersey, but he's here in Texas, in Lake Jackson, Texas, in the studio. Chris, welcome to our program.
It is great to be back in Lake Jackson, and I'm looking forward to the Mises event tomorrow as well.
Oh, wonderful. Good to have you here. It's a little bit different because you're under the gun directly. You get asked more questions when you're in the studio, so I hope you are prepared.
I hope so too.
You're always prepared because the subject is pretty easy. Do you like liberty? Yeah, I do that. Do you hate tyranny? Yeah, I hate tyranny. Do you like the Fed? Nope, you've answered correctly. I don't think the Fed's a good idea. So that's what we're going to talk about, something we've talked about before. But the question that we're asking in the title is, which is going to come first, the loss of liberty or the end of the Fed? Because they are related. And we have a group of things that we're going to talk about that undermine liberty related to the Federal Reserve System. Because so much of the evil going on since we've had a Federal Reserve throughout the world has been done by this mischief of central banking. And that's also a big threat to liberty, and liberty is threatened as well. So we have a lot to talk about because the list is long. I don't even know if I can go through my whole list of the things I think result from the Federal Reserve. Mm-hmm. There's not much, unless you love government. If you would like very, very limited government, you can't like the Fed. And so there's so many things going on. But basically, the situation we have now in our international affairs, the trade affairs, the war, and the national defense, and personal liberties, it's related to the fact that the financing comes from the Federal Reserve. And as far as I'm concerned, illegally, immorally, and they are equivalent to counterfeiters, and they really, I think, politically speaking, the hottest issue now that should be used here should be because people are worried about the discrepancy in wealth distribution. Well, there's a reason for that, and it's not because people work hard and they provide a good product and they make a lot of money. That sort of sounds like the free market. That is not the reason. If they care about poor people and watching the middle class being wiped out, they ought to know more about the Federal Reserve.
That's right, Dr. Paul. And a lot of people have the misinformation or the wrong impression that we have capitalism and free markets in America. We see in the papers that we should ditch our blind faith in markets as if that even exists. We do not have capitalism and free markets. We have like state capitalism in America, where you have a marriage of corporations and government. And you hear about it, it's even pitched as public-private partnerships, that we need even more of these things. And we have bailouts and too big to fails. And so we have to really separate corporation and state. And the Fed is actually a linchpin to this whole system.
You know, there was a financial article out, and we talked about it before. It's the financial bubbles everywhere. Everything is a bubble because everything is depending on the dollar, and it's international because we're the reserve currency of the world. So in many ways, having the reserve currency of the world is a benefit, especially if it's total fiat because it's free. Mm-hmm. So they legalized totally the right of our central bank to print gold, and that of course occurred in 1971. And the one thing you can predict from that is that it will distort interest rates and debt will go up. And just look at how many examples could we find now. How big is the debt bubble, the government debt bubble, the institutional debt bubble? There's an article just this week on the IMF at record levels, $188 billion of debt, and it happens when interest rates are distorted. Well, they're running out of steam to distort the interest rates. They're lower than zero now, but that means the money is free, encourages people to do things, and they accumulate more debt. And if the debt is a problem, they just borrow more money. But even though on the surface stock markets like it, And they figure as long as the money's free, people will keep buying stocks and the bubble will last forever. And I can remember so clearly 1989 when they had somewhat of a similar situation in Japan. And the Japanese market was like at 40,000. They said, well, but the banks are involved and they're not ever going to let it crash. And then it went down to 7,000 or something like that and still really hasn't recovered. Well, that was a big deal. But I think what we have now, the distortions in the market, the distortion of our personal liberties, the problems that we have in foreign policy, I think that situation is worse than anything the world has ever faced before, because nobody ever dreamed about it. I bet you there's very few people on Wall Street that studied in school when they studied finance about when to use negative interest rates. Do you think anybody learned that in college or someplace? But it seems like they're not complaining. They complain a little bit because they were confused. But just think of recently, they needed a little extra cash, $400 billion to support the repo market. So all of a sudden it was there and we're back at it again. But I think it's more dangerous right now because before they ask a few questions, very few questions are being asked right now.
Right, and you know, there's a lot of people in America who are against big government. I genuinely believe that, and I think there's a lot of Republicans, citizens that are against big government. Not so much the politicians, even though they use the rhetoric to get elected. But you can't get rid of big government as long as you have a Federal Reserve. It's just not going to happen for many of the reasons that you stated. The Fed prints the money, so it gives the politicians the ability to go and buy votes. I mean, we've gone way past the safety net, what they used to call it, to now just what would you like? What can I give you so that you vote for me? Would you like your debt wiped away, your student debt? So it's out of control on that end, on the welfare side. And on the warfare side, too. Even President Trump, he can't even make the simple move of taking troops out of Syria that are there illegally. He's got to keep some there. So the welfare state, the warfare state, nothing shrinks. The budget doesn't shrink, the deficits don't shrink. So the Fed is the one that makes all of this happen. It's one thing to think about doing this stuff, but the Fed actually makes it possible for government to do this.
You know, we should be able to make a good economic argument against this process, but that doesn't seem to work because of the free stuff. And you should be able to make the argument, well, where do we get this authority? You know, we used to ask that, not very often anymore. Does it come from the Constitution? Well, let's check. It says only gold and silver is the only thing you can use as legal tender. Mm-hmm. So anything else is illegal. But we should also approach this because people now are exclaiming how morally sensitive they are to make sure that the middle class doesn't get wiped out. They should look at this as a fraudulent system because it is counterfeiting. And if you say, well, do we want the counterfeiters to be in charge? Well, they're in charge. They're the biggest counterfeiters in the history of mankind when they can create $15 trillion to bail out, the mortgage companies, a decade ago. And they're getting ready to do it again. And who knows how many people they salvaged this past couple weeks over this new QE. But the other thing is a lot of people don't realize what they're doing is a tax. And I've claimed, and I think it's pretty accurate, that the Fed is the biggest taxer. Mm-hmm. We have income tax and sales tax and all this, but the inflation tax is really evil, and one of the reasons why the middle class gets wiped out because price increases affect the middle class more than anybody else. So we are big taxers, and the people who are getting stuff, I don't even have to pay income tax, and they argue that everything is okay. What we need to be is in charge and tax those people who have made too much money providing services. So they go on and on. But it is a tax. I have always claimed, when the subject came up in Washington about what form of taxation do you like? Do you like the flat tax or the sales tax or whatever? And I said I don't get into that argument because I think I like to think of it and warn people that spending is the tax. Governments spend and then they tax whatever is necessary. Income taxes, excise taxes, they borrow money, they print money, but there's a payment. And the people who shout the loudest for more free stuff are the ones who pay the heaviest tax, and but the bleeding hearts won't listen to that. I've tried to approach some progressives, and Ralph Nader will listen to this argument, and other progressives will listen to it. When I had Audit the Fed bill in Congress, we had the progressives supporting us, to find out what's going on, and that is what we need. It can't be a partisan vote. It has to be one. I think it has to be a moral, constitutional vote, and that it's in their best interest to look into this and deal with fraud, and why it should be stopped.
Right, and our founders, they were brilliant when they came to the money issue. They put it into the Constitution. They did not want the Fed or the federal government to create money out of thin air, which is what we essentially have now. And they were very explicit about it. But as time went on, the constitutional protections, they wither away. And it took a while, all the way until 1913, and a few failed experiments at central banking to finally get the one that stuck. And it's been with us for 100 years now. And all we have to do is go back to the law of the land, the Constitution, not ignore it, and we could have sound money again.
See, they seem not to believe us when we tell them that's too simple.
Yeah.
a lot of the answers to our very complex problems are, pretty clear cut and not complex. But anybody who wants to increase the size and scope of government would support the system. But I think most people have some areas where they would like to see the government not get any bigger, whether it's on the intrusions of civil liberties and our privacy, whether it's overseas wars going on, and also in economics. And yet, the system that we have today is the vehicle for expanding government. And one of the other reasons related to what I said a few minutes ago is that the inflation tax provides a delay. Let's just suppose for a minute that if the government were held rigidly to the Constitution, you don't go to war unless it's declared, and when you declare it, you pay it on a monthly basis by the people. Mm-hmm. Well, no, you delay it, and therefore the people who are penalized, the people who suffer the most, nobody knows who they are because it might be delayed right now. Everything that we're doing currently, the real consequence is not going to be found out until the collapse comes, when the dollar doesn't function and government collapses. And we know what that's like because we've seen the cities that have exaggerated the control of their own cities, and the socialist approach doesn't work. And eventually you have homelessness and people starving, and the people who care about their lives and family, they move out. And They think, well, that's San Francisco. We don't care about San Francisco, something like that. But the whole thing is, they ought to just stop for a minute and visualize, could this be true for a whole country? Well, it has in Zimbabwe, it has in Venezuela. Could it happen to America? Well, let's hope we wake up before it could get anything like that. But it really starts gnawing at me when I think of having gone in and out of places like San Francisco and LA and the various cities, and all of a sudden look at those pictures, and sometimes the answers is, well, what we need is more government houses. We need to build more houses, and they never stop and think, well, why are these people homeless? Well, one of the reasons is they're suffering from inflation, and many of them are still working, except the price of a house or a rent they can't afford. So it's monetary that causes these things and contributes it to it. And then that promotes the political antagonism. Everybody has a special answer. One person might say, well, military Keynesianism, we need to spend more money on the military and that'll create jobs. And others will say, no, we just need more welfare benefits, and that just contributes to more debt. Right. And that's why right now the momentum is that if we have to make a prediction, what I'm going to say, at least with a little bit of hope, that we destroy the Fed first and that we restore liberty. That should be our goal.
That's right. And I'm going to end on that note, Dr. Paul. Whether it's the end of liberty or end of the Fed, I'm going to tell you what the answer is. It's going to be end of the Fed first. Because as our founders pointed out, liberty is a part of our nature. It's not man-made. The Fed is man-made, so the Fed will go first. How long they'll be around, how long the idea of central banking around, well, it's up to us to speak the truth and let people know that, number one, this is corrupt and there's a better way. Sound money is the way to go. And what better environment than what we have today to communicate with people like this on social media, on the internet, despite all the censorship and how they try to shut us down. There's ways around the official channels which are losing credibility every single day. So there's reason to be optimistic. Liberty will win. Let's do our best to make it sooner rather than later.
Well, very good, Chris. And in spite of all these problems that we talk about, I still remain optimistic because what has to be done is we have to change attitudes, and that's what we're in. For instance, right now we're here in Lake Jackson with the Mises Institute, and they've been around for a good many years, if I could add them up, because I helped them get started as 30-some years. And they've influenced a lot of people. And we meet young people. There'll be a lot of young people at our function on Saturday, and they're enthusiastic. So yeah, I think it's an ideological war. You have to change people's attitudes. And the ideas can't be stopped no matter what the government and special interests say. But the problem is there has to go through a lot of suffering until people decide, well, we better look at something else. But they have to have it available to look at. And that's why the the education process is so necessary. And there's a lot of young people that I meet that are quite a bit different than what you read about, because you read about the outrageous things they're doing in the cultural Marxism and all the ideas of what free speech is all about. It's in many ways pretty crazy. But it isn't quite that bad, and it is going to get worse. We are going to see a crash and bubble, but then we better be very active and spread a message of liberty. And that's what this program tries to do, spread the message of liberty and show that it's not overwhelming. We've had a good taste of liberty in this country, and the statistics are on our side. This whole idea that this is the type of thing that creates war and poverty ought to be a strong enough reason for people to, consider what we're doing. But no, power is an addictive factor, and I think so many people who are on the other side and are our enemies, they want power. Mm-hmm. So we need to change that attitude, and we hope that you will remain with us and spread our message. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.